Hello, General Biology, and welcome back. We're still in Chapter 1. This is Section 1.3, and it's the second screencast of Section 1.3, and we've been talking about the characteristics of living things. So we're going to move on to the next characteristic, and that is that living things are made up of cells, one or more cells. And these are the smallest units that are considered fully alive. So, if we were to take a cell and break it down any further, that's not life. But a single cell, that is life. And what we know about cells is, look at this, they can grow. That's a characteristic of life. They can respond to their surroundings. They can reproduce. They also contain genetic material, which this isn't on here, but they contain DNA or some kind of genetic code. Okay, so that's one of their characteristics. They can maintain homeostasis, as we said, respond to their, we didn't say that, homeostasis. They require some sort of energy in order to exist, to go through metabolism. So even the cells themselves, they require or have the characteristics of living things within them. Even though one cell could be considered living, they're very complex and highly organized, and we're going to see that when we talk about it in a later chapter. So when we think about a leaf on a tree, a leaf contains millions and millions of cells. So can you imagine a tree containing gazillions and trillions and a googlins and whatever high number, hecto, whatever numbers, biggest number out there can contain. So we can go from being unicellular to multicellular. Another characteristic of life is over the generations, organisms can evolve. They can change over time. And this is important because as the environment changes, we need to be able to change and adapt to the environment. Organisms have evolved. When Darwin set sail to map the world, he discovered armadillos. And the armadillo was about 3 feet in size. It was huge. Today, armadillos are about 1 foot in size as their biggest, or even smaller than that. So it's evolved. It doesn't have to be as big. It's changed over time. Humans, we have an appendix. The appendix was thought to be used to help fight toxins because that's what the appendix is used for in birds. Well, now that we know what's good to eat and what's bad to eat, we no longer need it, so our appendixes are getting smaller. And there's people being born today without an appendix. So changes take place in order for us to be able to survive and meet the changes in our environment. And the evolutionary changes of all forms of life have that common origin that started about 35 billion years ago when our Earth was formed. So evidence of this shared history is found in all aspects of living and fossil organisms, and the physical features to the structures of proteins to the sequences of information in DNA. There have been signs of one of the first plants that existed about 400 million years ago, and that's called a Cooksonia. And these have been preserved in rocks. These have been preserved in rocks that we've been able to. All right, I'm plugged in now. Excuse me for that little interruption there. Okay, so continuing on, we've just seen the 8 characteristics of living things. Please make sure that you check your textbook and you're reading the textbook and you're looking at the examples in there, okay? Because on the test what I will do is I will say something like birds fly south for the winter, and you need to tell me that that is a living thing responding to its environment, okay? So we're going to now look in this section is the big ideas in biology, and there are going to be some central themes. So when we study this year, we're going to be looking at, of course, cells, the cellular basis of life. We're also going to be considering information and heredity. We'll look at matter and energy, and we're going to look at growth and development, reproduction, homeostasis, evolution. All of that, we're going to look at the university and diversity of life, the interdependence we have in nature, and then we're going to see that science is going to be a way of understanding all of that. So in the book, you're going to notice that it has big ideas. And these are the ideas that kind of overlap and interlock with each other. One of the things that I said to you, to be successful on tests, you can't just memorize. If you tell me, oh, Mrs. Saunders, but I studied, I memorized everything, I made vocabulary cards, and I looked at them, and I made a Quizlet, and I studied those Quizlets. That's good. That's going to give you your basic understanding of the terms. But now you're going to have to take that and put it together, compile it, and say, how can I apply those terms? So the example that I just gave you, birds fly south for the winter, is a way of applying the knowledge that you know that organisms respond to their environment. Okay, so you can't just memorize that organisms respond to your environment. You have to be able to generate some examples and make connections that way. So everything's going to overlap. You're going to see what we learn in this chapter is going to apply to what we learn in the next chapter and the next chapter. So you can't just leave anything behind. You've got to pick it up and carry it on with you. So we will consider life on a cellular basis, and all living things are going to be made up of cells. In order to understand cells, though, we're going to have to look at the chemistry of living things. So we'll talk a little bit about chemistry. But we will see that as far as being cells, we can have organisms that are single cell that can live individually, like a paramecium, and a paramecium kind of looks like a fuzzy little slipper here. This is a paramecium. And versus a euglena, which kind of has a little unusual blobby shape with a flagella. So we'll have unicellular, an amoeba, which kind of doesn't have any particular shape at all to it. So we can have unicellular organisms. We can also have multicellular organisms. Plants and animals consist of more than one cell, and their cells are different sizes, different shapes, and they have different functions. We call this differentiation. Or specialization. They're specialized cells. They perform a specific job or a function in that. So we know that organisms, anything that's life, can be either unicellular or multicellular. We know that they have that hereditary information. We're going through this again. DNA is that genetic code, and we know that the genetic code of us today was similar to the genetic code of the organisms that lived 3.5 billion years ago, because we've been able to find cells from fossilized organisms, and we can study them. So that DNA, that genetic code, as I said, not only does it describe how tall you're going to be, your nose shape, your eye color, it also determines your risk for cancer, the amount of cholesterol that will be in your blood, the color of your children's hair. So all of that is going to be found in this huge macromolecule that determines who you are. We talked about matter and energy. Life requires some sort of matter that serves as nutrients. You eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that's going to help build body structures and help fuel your life processes. When we talk about life processes, that's growth, repair, maintenance, and reproduction. Okay, so those are going to be those life processes. Organisms like plants, they're going to get their energy from sunlight, and they make their own nutrients from air, water, and the soil and the sunlight. Other organisms have to eat other plants or other animals in order to get their energy. But they need some sort of energy that they get from the earth. And that's where that web of interdependent relationships come in. That's where we require the interactions between other organisms and that non-living environment. As far as growth and development and reproduction is concerned, we talked about that tadpole. Everything is going to grow and develop. Can you think of anything else that grows and develops, that changes, it metamorphoses? Oh, I hear you saying it, a caterpillar. Yep, exactly. A caterpillar is going to go into a butterfly. And that's one example of growth, development, and change. Reproduction is going to be producing new individuals. So during growth and development, we're going to get generalized cells that will become more different and more specialized to perform particular functions. And then as they become specialized, that's going to build tissues such as your brain and your muscles and your digestive organs, and they're going to serve the functions that enable an organism to survive. Homeostasis is just that maintenance, that balance, that stable internal environment. When you don't have homeostasis, that can have fatal consequences. So running high fevers, 105, 106 for a long period of time, that's changing homeostasis, and that can be deadly. Cells can only live within a very narrow temperature range, and that's just too hot for them. Specialized plant cells help leaves regulate gases that enter and leave the plant. There's cells that are called guard cells that are around a cell in a plant, and they can actually cause this to open and close. And when it opens, it allows moisture in and gases in, and when it closes, it doesn't. So that's how cells can regulate in leaves during droughts and high temperatures. So it helps maintain homeostasis. Evolution, everything evolves. Evolutionary change links all forms of life to a common origin more than 3.5 billion years ago, to the single cells that were in the primordial soup. We'll talk more about that in class, but we do have that ability to change as our environment changes. There's a lot of evidence that's been found in all aspects of living and fossil organisms, from physical features to structures of proteins, that show that evolution has happened. We still consider evolution going from ape to man a theory, but we do know that organisms can adapt and change, and we're seeing greater connections with this. All right, we're getting to the end of the screencast, so I'll end this here, and we will continue in the next. See you in a few.